Howdy everybody, Mr. Bob, your neighborhood naturalist. I'm Bob Langston from the North Carolina Zoo, and it's been a couple of weeks since I've had a chance to join you. I haven't had a chance to say hello since Thanksgiving, so I hope everyone was able to enjoy a slightly modified, it's still a really good Thanksgiving holiday. Last time we were together, I was talking a little bit about cameras and camera selection. I got long-winded, sorry about that. By request of some folks who had seen that last video, asked for a little bit more clarification and a little bit of maybe breaking things down into some smaller, easier bites. So I thought I'd give that a shot today. So we're going to talk a little bit about cameras, lenses, and a few other things, sort of a continuation from the last time. Now, I have been accused from time to time of never wanting to let things go, holding on to everything, and sometimes it doesn't have an awful lot of sense, but I still do that. And just as an example, right here, I happen to have this handy little device. Looks a little old-fashioned by a lot of standards, but this was the very first serious camera I ever bought and worked with. I bought this when I was a sophomore in high school. At the time, it cost around $100. I checked an inflation calculator today, and it would be almost $500 if you use that same value today. This is a Yashica Electro 35 GSN. It's the fourth iteration of this camera that Yashica made. And the reason I bought this one was right here. It's the lens. This is a great big lens, and it opens to f1.7. That means that the iris of the camera, or the aperture, is really wide. And when the wider the aperture, sometimes you refer to that as a fast lens. This one is what's called a fixed focal length, meaning it only has one focal length, and it's fixed to the camera, so you can't change the lens. Back in those days, if you wanted a close-up, you had to get closer to the camera. If you wanted a wide shot, you'd have to back away. That was the only choice you had, pretty much, when you worked with a fixed lens camera like this. Now, a couple of things about this lens. This lens has got a focal length of 45 millimeters. Now, that means from where the light enters the lens here until it hits the film, which is in a plane about here, the total focal length is about 45 millimeters. And just to give you an idea, that's somewhere right around 2 inches. In the photo world, a lens that has a focal length of 45 to 55 millimeters, again, just about 2 inches, is what's called a normal lens. And what it means is that the camera sees pretty much what your eye sees. Your eye has a focal length from the front of your cornea to the back, the very back of your retina, of about between 45 to 55 millimeters. What that means is you see things at a particular angle of view from here across, and that's how everything focuses. Now, when we start talking about longer lenses, longer lens means that the focal length is much longer. So from where the light enters the lens until it gets back here could be 80, 100, 200, 300, even up to 500 millimeters. And that means it's a telephoto lens. What happens when a lens is shorter? It means that your angle gets really wide, and it tends to cause some interesting distortions. Really short ones are what are called fisheye lenses. So that's kind of that. So normal lens is really between 45 to 55 and a 35 millimeter. Because often when you buy a digital camera, you'll get what's called a 35 millimeter equivalent. And that's what that means. The difference is that the sensor in a digital camera like this, smaller than a 35 millimeter negative, so you have a different lens. It gets really confusing. Anyway, when you have a single lens reflex, there are a couple of different references to lenses. Normal lens, 45 to 55 millimeters. Occasionally you'll hear the term prime lens. And prime lens doesn't mean, dude, I spent buckets of money on this particular lens. This is nice. It is prime. No, that's not what it means. Prime lens means it has a fixed focal length. So it would be, so in this particular case, this has a 45 millimeter fixed focus lens. So this is a prime normal lens. just kind of that way. So prime lens would be 100 millimeters. Now, very few of your digital cameras, especially your all-in-one point-and-shoot cameras, like the Fuji I have here, are prime lenses. Very few of them are normal, that you can get a normal range. But anyway, so here's what happens. I'll give you a little experiment here. The lens itself just brings light into the camera, or excuse me, it allows light to pass into the camera, especially when the shutter's open. So with a normal lens, you see what normally you'd see with your eyes. But if you want to get an idea for what happens with longer lenses, we're going to borrow a couple of little cardboard tubes. Don't tell anybody, but I liberated this one from a roll of toilet paper. I know it's a rare commodity, but it happens. So if you have a short telephoto lens, basically you could take one of these and cup it over your eye, close the other eye. You'll notice your field of vision gets narrower and it doesn't let as much light reach your eye. That's what happens with telephoto lenses. With really, really long ones, you get a longer cardboard tube and you only have a very narrow field of vision and it gets even darker. So what happens is when you use one of these cameras like this and you start extending that lens out to catch the bird that's in the tree behind me, the further and further you extend that lens, there are a couple of oddball things that happen. Number one, the iris of your camera has to open wide, first thing. And the second thing that happens is your exposure time gets much, much longer. That means if the bird moves, it's going to be blurry. Now, a lot of cameras have little computers in them now that can compensate for a lot of these things, but back in the old days, we didn't. So I did a little experiment using the manual mode on this Fuji, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So when you're going to photograph nature, back in the days when, as I said, if you wanted to do a close-up, you'd have to get close, you'd have to get down on your belly, and chances are, if it was something that was skittish or was concerned about you being there, it was going to run away. You'd miss the shot. If it was something that was way out there, by the time you took a picture of it, all you're going to see is a tiny little dot of color, and you'll be explaining this to your friends. You see this little dot right here in the picture? Yeah, that there is a subarctic carp jaeger. I've only ever seen one in my entire life. So now we have the benefit of these lenses that can be much, much longer. They're telephoto. They can come in and out. Now, this one, I've had this. I will tell you that when I bought this camera, like I said, I was a sophomore in high school. It was in 1975, and I probably shot a couple of thousand photographs with this, probably a couple of hundred rolls of film. I think the last time I actually used this, I was on a vacation down, it was a Thanksgiving vacation, a trip down in Florida, and it just happened to be the camera I had with me. I got some really gorgeous sunset pictures and everything. It was really cool. Then I loaned it to my dad. My dad liked it. He took a lot of pictures. And then as time goes by, ultimately, we move into digital. So the camera I'm going to use today for this little experiment, this one is, it's a Fuji. And this one is an 8300. It has an extremely long lens. So that means from where its shortest focal length to its longest focal length is 42 times. So that means, imagine me 42 times bigger. If the quarantine goes on much longer, I'll be 42 times bigger. But anyway, so what I did was I have this little doggy toy, this green chewy ball, soccer ball that's sitting on top of this particular little stand. It's an old lamp stand. And so I took a couple of pictures, and I'll show you the results as we go. So the first one, as I said, back in the days when, if you wanted to get a close-up, you had to set your camera really close. You didn't have a zoom lens. You'd shoot this way. Camera's close up and everything else. On a bright sunny day, I'm pretty washed out today, but on a bright sunny day, what happens is this. There's enough light coming into the camera so that the little brain in my camera and everything, in order to get I shot these pictures, by the way, in manual exposure mode. So I was setting the lens aperture, I was setting the exposure time and everything based on the conditions here, reviewing the pictures so that you can tell that. Old school film days, we didn't have the ability to review the pictures. Sometimes you'd shoot one, you go, oh, this is going to be great, and you get it, and it's really bright and washed out and overexposed. So that's one of the wonderfully beautiful things about digital cameras, is you have that instant ability to check your exposure and see how it looked. But I shot this in all manual. So the first exposure you're going to see is this camera up close in manual mode, And in this particular case, I have the lens closed down, so it's the tiniest aperture possible. Think about your eyes. In a bright sunny day, the pupil in your eye is really tiny. That means the aperture of your eye, the iris, is closed down. It doesn't let too much light in. That's a normal response for our eye. And one of the great things about cameras is that over the years, we've tried to make cameras work like the human eye does. And it's not perfect. There are issues. But anyway, so when you shoot like this with the lens closed down, you're going to get an image that looks a lot like this. This particular image, you'll see we have the little Nerf soccer ball. And with the Nerf soccer ball, you'll notice that there's some stuff behind you. Now, normally, this is going to be with a normal lens. So this is about 50 millimeters exposure, 50 millimeters in focal length. So this is a pretty normal looking thing. In the center, you have the green ball. And if you look in the background, everything's not in perfect focus, but a lot of the stuff is in pretty decent focus. You can tell what's back there. There's some trees back there. There's some leaves on the ground. There's some grass growing. And that's actually pretty normal. That's what we would expect to see. There's a messed up thing that happens sometimes as your eye opens up. When your eye opens up, one of the things that happen, by the way, that concept I was just talking about where you have things in focus at the, you can see the ball and also the stuff behind it, is what we refer to as depth of field. And sometimes if you're photographing nature, you want lots of depth of field. There's something in front of you, close by, there's something out there, 20 yards out, and there's something 100 yards out, and you want it all to be in focus as you compose this beautiful landscape picture. That's what you're trying to get. And if you use all automatic features in your camera, the chances of hitting it are going to be, it's kind of a roll of the dice. You might get it, you might not. So anyway, one of the great things about this, though, is the depth of field. When the iris of your eye is closed down, you have much better depth of field. Likewise, when the aperture of your camera is closed down, much better depth of field. That's good if you want to get multiple things in a picture that are at different distances from where your camera is standing. The second set of images, I took the camera and the tripod and went way back over there and used the zoom. And I zoomed this sucker in on the ball and everything like that. And this is what these look like. Now, again, I'm shooting in manual mode, so I have manually set the exposure. And there's probably about 7 or 8 of each picture just because I set different exposure lengths. I set different apertures and everything like this. So when in this one, you get a pretty good look at what the ball looks like. You can read the Nerf on there if you look really closely. It's in focus. But look at the stuff behind it. It's all washed out. Completely washed out. I have lost my depth of field, and this is one of the problems sometimes when you shoot nature with a really long lens from a long, long way away, is that you might get the bird or the snake or whatever animal you're trying to photograph, the flower or something of that nature. That's going to be in focus, but the leaves of the plant that the flower's growing on are going to be fuzzy because you've lost your depth of field. With the human eye, how that works is at night, when you go out and you're driving at night, the iris of your eye relaxes and your pupil is wide open, it's dilated, and you have a really tough time focusing on anything that's as you turn your head. Go to the eye doctor and get your eyes dilated. It's a real adventure. So you lose your depth of field at night. It's a chronic problem for a lot of us drivers. And then what happens is when some headlights hit you, it takes a second or two for your eye to close down to limit that light, and you get a little bit headlight blind. We call it the deer in the headlights look. So that's what you do. Now, you can use these effects for different purposes. As I said, you can get some nature shots where you have things that are right here in front of you, out here 10 feet, out there 100 feet, and you want them all to be in focus. So you need to learn how to work with your camera to be able to use that closed down lens aperture to get that depth of field. Occasionally, and with a picture like this one I'm going to show you right here, you're going to actually try and wash out the background. You see this crazy insect here. This is called a robber fly, and this one was out on the porch rail on my front porch last summer. And in this particular case, if you could see all the stuff that's behind it, you would see the wooden porch rail, you would see some flowers that are growing behind it, you would see the grass in my front yard, and the road would be at the top of the picture. But by shooting this with such a long lens and having it way exposed and having the lens wide open, I got rid of that depth of field so you can concentrate on the robber fly. So with that, that's just some stuff that you can practice with. Find a camera you like, go out and practice with it, learn how to use it. Back in the days when I was working with this one as a senior in high school, I was the photographer for our school newspaper, and this was a fully automatic camera. You would basically set your lens aperture and it would determine the exposure from there, and that was it. Over time, I learned how to make it do the things I wanted to do simply by just taking a lot of pictures. And that's one of the great things about digital. You can take a lot of pictures, get a big memory card, go out and practice. You want to get good nature pictures, you got to practice. It's really, really that simple. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of it, but that just gives you some kind of insight into what the different lenses do, the different lengths of the lenses do as you, if you're using a bridge camera like this, an all-in-one, it gives you various other things that, weight techniques and stuff you can do to get some kind of cool pictures. So that's kind of it. I'm not going to get into too much more about it. All of photography is largely physics. There's mathematical explanations for all of this stuff, and I couldn't tell you what they are. That's what they go. It's a whole field called optics. Anyhow, North Carolina Zoo, we are open. Now, we were closed on Thanksgiving Day. We will be closed on Christmas Day, and that's coming up. This coming weekend is the second and final weekend of our Believe events. If you'd like to get in on that, just visit our website at www.nczoo.org. You can find out about Believe. You can purchase your tickets online. You can reserve yourself an entry time. You do need to wear a mask. Going to say it right there. I've got a work crew. We'll be up in the up on Purgatory Mountain working on a new trail. We've got to wear masks while we're up there working on the trail. So please wear a mask. It's one of the best ways to keep yourself safe and keep the people around you really safe. There's a lot of other cool things that are going on with the North Carolina Zoo. We do have some other educational opportunities. We have virtual camps that will be taking place over the Christmas break. So you can register yourself, register someone in your family for the virtual camps. Again, it's www.nczoo.org. I will see you again in about 2 weeks. I'm Mr. Bob, your neighborhood naturalist, Bob Langston with the North Carolina Zoo. Thank you for letting me join you. Please take care of yourselves. Please stay safe. But in the meantime, get outside and enjoy this thing we call nature. I'll see you later, okay? Take care.